But I went to see him one time at the Garden at Boston Gardens when it was still the Boston Gardens, and he sent word out to come back to the locker room after the game, and so I.
When Don Johnson first appeared on television screens in the 1980s, he was the embodiment of cool. With his pastel suits, designer stubble, and signature smirk, he redefined what it meant to be a TV icon in Miami Vice. For years, his charisma made him one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces, a man whose confidence and effortless style seemed ageless. But now, recent photos and reports have surfaced that left fans heartbroken and shocked. Don Johnson is nearly unrecognizable after his latest surgery. For someone who had always aged gracefully in the public eye, the sudden change has sparked concern and confusion. Many longtime admirers are asking the same question. What happened to Don Johnson? The man who once turned heads with his magnetic presence now appears fragile, subdued, and drastically altered. Sources close to the actor reveal that what began as a medical necessity has spiraled into a deeply emotional journey, one that has tested not only his physical strength but also his sense of identity. Hollywood's obsession with youth has taken its toll on many stars, but for Don, this chapter seems different. Friends and family describe it not as vanity but survival, a fight against pain, aging, and the expectations that come with fame. Behind closed doors, Johnson is confronting the reality that even legends aren't immune to time or tragedy. This is the story of how one of television's greatest icons faced an unexpected battle, the toll it took on his spirit, and how he's fighting to redefine himself, not as the man he once was, but as the survivor he's before the surgeries. Before the whispers of change and the speculation about his health, Don Johnson was untouchable. In the 1980s, he wasn't just a television star, he was the television star. As Detective Sonny Crockett in Miami Vice, Johnson became the face of an entire generation of style and swagger. His pastel suits, unbuttoned shirts, and white Ferrari Daytona weren't just props. They defined an era. Viewers around the world tuned in week after week not just for the show's action, but to see Don embody effortless cool. What made Johnson's success remarkable was that it didn't come overnight. Born in Flat Creek, Missouri in 1949, Don grew up far from the glitz of Hollywood. He faced hardship early in life, moving from one small town to another and struggling to find direction. But it was that tough upbringing that gave him grit. When he arrived in Los Angeles, he had nothing but determination and a belief that he was destined for something greater. That belief paid off when Miami Vice hit the airwaves in 1984. The show revolutionized television. Its cinematic visuals, rock soundtrack, and sleek production style changed the landscape forever. At its center was Don Johnson, effortlessly blending charm, danger, and sensitivity. Overnight, he became a fashion icon, earning millions per episode, magazine covers, and a devoted global following. But success wasn't limited to television. Johnson transitioned into film roles, starring in Harley Davidson and The Marlboro Man and Tin Cup. He also pursued music, releasing albums that topped charts in Europe. Don Johnson wasn't just a performer. He was a brand, representing the ultimate 1980s fantasy of power, confidence, and control. Yet behind the perfectly styled hair and easy smile, there were cracks in the surface. Fame, as dazzling as it was, came with immense pressure. Hollywood's expectations were unforgiving, and Don knew that image was everything. The man who had worked tirelessly to reach the top began to feel trapped by the very persona he had created. Every red carpet, every camera flash reminded him that aging, in Hollywood's eyes, meant fading away. As the years rolled on, Don fought to stay relevant. He took on new roles that showcased his range, earning praise for performances in Nash Bridges, Django Unchained, and Knives Out. Yet no matter how powerful his acting remained, the whispers about his changing appearance began to overshadow his work. Fans noticed subtle differences, a tighter jawline, smoother skin, and expressions that seemed slightly unfamiliar. For Don Johnson, maintaining his image wasn't about vanity. It was about survival in an industry that often forgets its icons. But with every change came emotional and physical costs that no one outside his inner circle could truly understand. Before the world saw a man recovering from surgery, it saw a legend at his peak, confident, magnetic, and unstoppable. Yet even during those golden years, the seeds of his struggle were already being planted. Hollywood's glare never dims, and for Don Johnson, it was only a matter of time before that glare turned from admiration to scrutiny. Behind Don Johnson's million-dollar smile and undeniable charm, there was always a quieter story, a story of self-doubt, insecurity, and the relentless pressures of an industry obsessed with perfection. While audiences saw the effortlessly cool Sonny Crockett, the man behind the role often wrestled with exhaustion and personal demons. Fame, for Don, was both a blessing and a burden. It gave him everything he had ever dreamed of, but it also demanded a version of himself that he could never completely live up to. After the monumental success of Miami Vice, the expectations were suffocating. Every appearance, every interview, every photograph became a test to prove he still had that same youthful energy that had once defined him. The media adored him, but it also watched for flaws. For someone who came from humble beginnings, the constant need to maintain an image of invincibility took its toll. Don was not just competing with other actors, he was competing with his own legend. Off-screen, life wasn't as perfect as the Hollywood lights suggested. Johnson's relationships, while passionate, were often turbulent. His high-profile marriage to Melanie Griffith was filled with love but also chaos, marked by separations and reconciliations. Fame magnified everything. The highs felt higher, but the lows hit harder. Behind the scenes, he battled periods of loneliness, questioning who he truly was beyond the roles and headlines. As he aged, Don began to experience something every Hollywood icon eventually faces, the fear of fading relevance. Scripts became less frequent, and producers began favoring younger faces. For someone whose identity was so closely tied to his image, this was more than a career challenge. It was a personal reckoning. He had built a life on being seen, and now the spotlight was starting to dim. It was during this period that whispers about his health and appearance began to surface. Close friends noticed subtle signs of fatigue. He was working less, avoiding public appearances and keeping his personal life tightly guarded. Sources revealed that Don had quietly undergone minor cosmetic procedures before, nothing out of the ordinary for someone in Hollywood. But as time went on, those procedures became less about vanity and more about maintaining control in a world that seemed to be slipping away from him. Those closest to him described him as deeply reflective, haunted by the passing of time and the loss of the youthful face that had once defined him. Don's never been afraid of getting older, a friend once said, but he's always been afraid of being forgotten. And so, when the opportunity arose for a more extensive surgical procedure that promised rejuvenation, Don saw it as more than a cosmetic choice. It was a chance to reclaim part of himself that fame had taken away. What no one could have predicted was how drastically it would change. Not only his appearance, but also his sense of identity. The man who had built a career on confidence and charisma suddenly found himself questioning everything. Looking in the mirror no longer brought reassurance. Instead, it brought confusion, a reminder that time, no matter how hard one tries, cannot truly be reversed. The smile that had once lit up screens now carried a quiet sadness, the kind that only comes from confronting the truth about who we are beneath the surface. For Don Johnson, the real battle wasn't in maintaining his looks. It was in learning how to accept the man he had become. When the news broke that Don Johnson had undergone a major surgical procedure, most fans assumed it was just another celebrity touch-up, a little rejuvenation for the cameras. But this time, it wasn't cosmetic vanity driving him. It was necessity. For months, Don had been quietly battling pain, fatigue, and the toll of years spent working long hours under harsh lights and relentless pressure. What began as a simple medical consultation soon revealed deeper complications that needed urgent attention. Close friends say the decision didn't come easily. Don had always prided himself on aging gracefully, embracing his silver hair and rugged lines as marks of experience. But this surgery was different. It wasn't about keeping up appearances. It was about maintaining health and functionality. The procedure, however, was more complex than anyone expected, and the aftermath left him physically and emotionally shaken. Reports suggest that during recovery, complications arose that affected his facial muscles and overall appearance. When he first saw himself in the mirror, the shock was overwhelming. The man who once radiated confidence now barely recognized his reflection. For Don, whose identity had been intertwined with his image for decades, this realization cut deep. The face that had once made him a Hollywood icon now seemed foreign. The public reaction was swift and unforgiving. Paparazzi photos began circulating, and within hours, social media exploded. What happened to Don Johnson? Trended worldwide. Some fans expressed sympathy, while others mocked his appearance. The cruel comments and endless speculation added emotional pain to his already difficult recovery. The pressure to explain himself, to the media, to fans, even to his family, was immense. Friends who visited him during those early weeks of healing described a man caught between gratitude for being alive and despair over what he had lost. His once sparkling eyes seemed clouded with exhaustion. He reportedly told one close confidant, "I thought I was fixing something. I didn't realize what it would take from me. It wasn't just physical recovery Don faced, it was psychological. For decades, he'd been defined by his face, his charm, his effortless cool. Now he had to rediscover his identity beyond that. The change forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about fame, aging, and self-worth. For the first time in his life, Don was stripped of the mask that had protected him for so long, and what remained was raw vulnerability. Still, even amid the pain, there was resilience. Those close to Don say he slowly began channeling his energy into healing, not just his body, but his spirit. He spent time with family, especially his children, who reminded him that his worth wasn't tied to how he looked, but to who he was as a father and person. They encouraged him to embrace the change, to see it as a new chapter rather than an ending. Gradually, Don began reappearing in public, not to reclaim fame, but to reclaim himself. When fans finally saw him again, thinner, softer-spoken, but smiling, many were moved. The man who once embodied unshakable confidence now carried something deeper: humility. He no longer tried to hide the traces of surgery. Instead, he carried them as part of his journey. Hollywood can be cruel to those who show vulnerability, but Don Johnson's resilience turned the narrative. Rather than being a cautionary tale, he became a symbol of survival, of what it means to lose something vital and still stand tall. The man the world once admired for his looks was now admired for his courage. And while the surgery changed his appearance forever, it also freed him from the impossible standard that had haunted him for decades. Don Johnson was finally learning what it meant to be truly seen, not as a star, but as a man. As the months passed after Don Johnson's surgery, the world began to see a different man, one stripped of Hollywood glamour but full of hard-earned grace. The once sharply dressed icon who embodied swagger and control now carried himself with quiet humility. His face may have changed, but his spirit had deepened. What many saw as a tragedy, Don himself began to see as a turning point, a rare opportunity to redefine what truly mattered. Recovery was slow. Physically, he endured months of therapy to regain strength and mobility. Emotionally, the healing took longer. For someone who had spent most of his life under the world's gaze, being judged for every wrinkle and flaw, Don had to learn to live outside of the spotlight's expectations. For the first time, he wasn't performing. He was simply living. Friends describe him now as more grounded than ever. He's taken to spending his time away from Hollywood's chaos, often retreating to his home in Colorado, surrounded by mountains and peace. Those close to him say he spends mornings walking alone, reflecting, often writing in a leather-bound journal he keeps with him at all times. He's at peace, one confidant revealed. He finally stopped chasing the man the world expected him to be, and started embracing the man he really is. The experience also brought Don closer to his family. His children, including Dakota Johnson, have become his anchors. Their unconditional love reminded him that his value isn't defined by cameras or critics. During private family gatherings, they often laugh, tease, and share memories of his Miami Vice days, moments that remind him how much joy he's brought into the world. Even in vulnerability, his charisma hasn't faded. It has simply transformed. The media, once cruel, began to shift tone. As fans saw Don re-emerge, older, changed, but unbroken, admiration replaced judgment. What had started as a wave of shock slowly evolved into respect. People recognized the courage it took to face public scrutiny while still standing tall. He didn't hide or retreat indefinitely. He confronted his new reality head-on, showing others that aging, pain, and transformation are part of the human story. Don himself has spoken quietly about his experience in recent interviews, choosing honesty over image. "We all wear masks," he said in one conversation. "Mine just slipped off sooner than I planned. But what's underneath? That's the truth of who we are." That raw honesty resonated deeply with fans who grew up idolizing him. They saw in Don's journey a reflection of their own, the struggle to accept change, to let go of youth, and to embrace authenticity. In a world obsessed with perfection, Don Johnson's story has become an unexpected symbol of acceptance. His scars, both seen and unseen, tell the story of a man who has lived fully, loved deeply, and survived more than most could imagine. He no longer measures his worth in roles or ratings, but in the quiet satisfaction of knowing he's lived on his own terms. Today, when fans see Don, they don't see the unrecognizable face that once made headlines. They see resilience. They see a legend who dared to age, who faced pain without shame, and who came out stronger on the other side. And maybe, just maybe, that's the truest kind of beauty. Not the flawless skin of youth, but the enduring light of a soul that refuses to dim.